5 warships, Sub-Overseer.
Seized without a single shot fired.
Efficient, Overseer.
Almost suspicious.
My job title is Fleet Disposal Coordinator, which sounds important until you realize what it actually means. I stand in a scrapyard the size of a small moon and sign forms that say, in essence, yes, that thing is definitely garbage now. I have a mug that says World's Okayest Employee, a coffee dispenser that hasn't worked properly since the series Accords, and a stack of decommissioning paperwork so thick it has its own gravitational pull. My name is Gary Okonkwo. I am not a hero. I would like that on the record before anything else happens. The 5 ships sitting in Bay 14 were, by any honest measure, junk. The TDS Marigold, the TDS Petunia, and 3 others whose names I genuinely could not tell you without checking the manifest, because someone in Fleet Naming Command apparently decided 40 years ago that decommission track vessels should all be named after flowers, presumably so nobody would get too attached. They were training hulls, reactor cores mothballed, weapons arrays stripped for parts. One of them still had a hole in the hull from a training accident in 2041 that we'd simply welded a metal sheet over and called character. So when the Vren Ascendancy showed up with 3 cruisers, a marching band's worth of ceremonial officers, and a demand that Earth surrender 5 active warships as tribute for violating the Threshold Accord, I did what any reasonable civil servant would do. I checked which 5 ships were next on my disposal list, filled out a transfer form, and told them to help themselves. I want to be clear that I did not consult anyone about this decision. It felt at the time like recycling. The Vren delegation was led by a gentleman. I use the term loosely, since he had 4 eyes and a voice like a cello being strangled, named Overseer Thexilvan. He arrived in ceremonial plating so ornate it must have taken his valet 3 hours to bolt on, and he informed me, through a translator drone, that the Ascendancy had broken the back of the Terran war machine without firing a single shot. I said, sure, yeah, take they're right there, and got back to my paperwork. His sub-overseer, a sharper-eyed one named Mrena, lingered a moment longer than the rest. She looked at the Marigold's hull patch. She looked at me. She said nothing, which in hindsight was the smartest thing anyone on that ship did all week. They towed the 5 vessels away within the hour. I filed the transfer, stamped it disposed, recipient, foreign power, and went home for dinner. The trouble, as I understand it, started about 6 hours later, when Overseer Thexilvan broadcast the seizure to the entire Vren Ascendancy as a triumph. I didn't see the broadcast myself. I was reheating leftovers, but I've since had it described to me in detail by people who thought it was the funniest thing they'd witnessed in their careers. Apparently, there were fireworks. Apparently, there was a song. Apparently, Thexilvan stood on a balcony in front of several million cheering Vren citizens and declared that the mighty Terran fleet had been gutted, humbled, and rendered toothless, and that the 5 confiscated warships would be paraded through the capital in 3 days' time as proof that humanity's bark had always exceeded its bite. Somewhere in that crowd, Sub-Overseer Mrena pulled up the whole registry numbers on her personal terminal because something about that welded patch on the Marigold had been bothering her all day. It took her 11 minutes to confirm that the 5 ships did not appear anywhere in Earth's active combat registry. It took her another 4 minutes to find them listed, instead, in a public decommissioning schedule that Earth's Fleet Disposal Office, that's my office, updates every quarter and which, embarrassingly, nobody had bothered to make classified, because why would you classify the trash schedule? I did not know any of this was happening. I was asleep. What I did know, the next morning, was that my supervisor called me at 6 a.m., asking why there were several dozen unread priority messages flagged urgent, all originating from something called the Vren Diplomatic Office, and all containing variations of the phrase, clarification requested immediately. I told her I'd disposed of 5 ships that were next on the list. She asked if I'd checked whether the Vren understood what disposal meant. I said I'd assumed the guy with the 4 eyes and the translator drone had done his own homework. She put her head in her hands, which I've learned is a gesture people make around me fairly often. Here's the part where I'd like to say I panicked because it would make for a better story, but the truth is I mostly just refilled my coffee and waited to see what would happen, the way you wait to see if a package you ordered actually shows up on the day the website promised. What happened, 3 days later, on the morning of the promised victory parade, was this. The Terran Third Fleet, the active fleet, the one with reactors that work and weapons that haven't been stripped for parts, crewed by people who very much do not think of themselves as paper pushers, had a scheduled joint exercise with 2 allied systems in the exact sector the Vren had chosen for their parade. Nobody had told the Vren this, because nobody at the Vren diplomatic office had asked, and it hadn't occurred to anyone at Fleet Command that they needed to announce their training schedule to a government they weren't currently at war with. It was, everyone agreed afterward, a scheduling coincidence of genuinely staggering proportions. The Third Fleet dropped out of transit 20 light minutes from the Vren capital at the exact moment the parade was passing beneath Overseer Thexilvan's balcony, towing the 5 decommissioned flower ships behind them like party favors nobody wanted back. I'm told the sensor operators on the Vren flagship saw the return signatures first, and initially assumed there had been an equipment malfunction because nothing that size was supposed to be able to move that quietly. Then the actual mass readings came back, and several of them reportedly had to sit down. The Third Fleet's lead cruiser alone outmassed every ship in the Vren Ascendancy combined, and it hadn't even bothered to power up its main batteries. It didn't need to. It was simply there, the way a mountain is simply there, blocking out a very large portion of the sky and making everyone reconsider several of their recent life choices. Fleet Admiral Renata Ose, who I have met exactly once and who terrifies me more than any alien I've encountered, hailed the Vren capital directly. I've heard the recording. She did not sound angry. She sounded, if anything, mildly inconvenienced, the way you sound when you find out someone's been using your parking spot. This is Admiral Ose, Terran Third Fleet. We're conducting scheduled maneuvers in this sector and noticed you're towing 5 vessels registered to our fleet disposal office. I want to confirm, did someone give you those, or did you take them? There was apparently a very long silence. Overseer Thexilvan, to his credit, tried to salvage the moment. He explained, with what I'm told was rapidly evaporating confidence, that the ships had been surrendered as tribute under the Threshold Accord, following the crippling of Earth's war fleet. Admiral Ose asked him to repeat the ship names. He did. She checked something on a datapad off-camera for what witnesses described as an uncomfortably long time. Then she said, and I am told this verbatim because 3 separate people wrote it down, those are training hulls. We were going to melt them down for scrap. Next month. You're welcome to keep them, but I should mention the reactors are non-functional and one of them has a hole in it that we patched with a repair panel because nobody wanted to pay for a real one. I understand there was a second, even longer silence. The Vren Ascendancy's official broadcast of the parade, which had been airing live to several million viewers, cut to technical difficulties roughly 9 seconds later and did not resume for the rest of the day. Sub-Overseer Mrena, who had already tried and failed to warn her superior that something didn't add up, later told a Terran liaison, off the record, and with what I'm told was visible relief, that she had personally recommended against the victory broadcasts that morning and had been overruled. The Third Fleet did not stay long. Admiral Ose apparently wished the Vren Ascendancy a pleasant afternoon, noted that the exercise schedule would have them passing through again next quarter, and left, towing nothing because, as she put it, we don't want the flower boats back, they're not ours anymore. That's not how disposal works. The 5 ships remained in Vren custody, orbiting the capital as an increasingly awkward monument to a victory speech that no longer existed anywhere except in several very embarrassed archived broadcasts nobody could quite bring themselves to delete. Back at the depot, I found out about all of this the way I find out about most things, which is that my supervisor forwarded me a memo 3 days later asking whether fleet disposal coordinators were required to notify diplomatic affairs before gifting decommissioned vessels to potentially hostile foreign powers, a policy question that, as far as I can tell, had genuinely never come up before in the department's history. I filled out the incident report. Under outcome, I wrote, disposal completed ahead of schedule. Recipient satisfied at time of transfer. I stand by that sentence. Nobody forced them to take the ships. Nobody forced them to throw a parade for the ships. That last part was entirely their own initiative, and frankly, I think the fireworks were a nice touch. 3 weeks later, I received a commendation for efficient resource turnover exceeding quarterly targets, along with a small bonus, which I used to buy a coffee maker that actually works. Sub-Overseer Mrena was, I'm told, quietly promoted to head of pre-broadcast fact-checking, a department that had apparently not previously existed at the Vren diplomatic office and now, somehow, does. I still work in Bay 14. There are new ships there now, next on the list, and if anyone wants to come collect them as tribute, I genuinely will not stop them. I've learned that the universe doesn't reward caution nearly as much as it rewards a coffee mug, a stamp, and a complete unwillingness to ask follow-up questions. The moral, if you want one, is that you should always check the hull registry before you throw yourself a parade. Nobody at the Ascendancy did. I, personally, did not even know a parade was happening. I was reheating leftovers. I stand by that decision, too.